Hello and welcome to York Universe, the astronomy and astrophysics program written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. I'll be one of your hosts this evening. I'm Dr. Elena Hyde, and I'm joined tonight by Sana Withers. We are broadcasting live from the Allan Carswell Observatory, located at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. As a reminder, York Universe broadcasts every Monday night at 9 p.m. local Toronto time or Tuesday morning at 2 a.m. UT if that's more your speed. The York Universe production works in concert with our online public viewing program run by the Observatory team, which also runs between the exact same hours, 9 to 10 p.m. local Toronto time. If you want to find out more about our wonderful shows or see the archives or any other information, you might want to check out our website, yorku.ca/science/observatory. If you're trying to find the show, you can always navigate to OPV online public viewing for our program. Join in the chat live on YouTube, or click on any link from our website that says YouTube, and you'll probably end up in the right place. For any questions or comments you have about past shows or suggestions for future topics, you can always email us at observe@yorku.ca. And of course, you can connect with us on social media with Twitter at York Observatory or at York Universe, and of course, Instagram at York U Observatory and Facebook at Allan Carswell Obs. All of our programs are free, but if you'd like to make a donation, you can always see us at that same website I mentioned before, yorku.ca/science/observatory. Our trusty crew on OPV is monitoring the YouTube chat room for questions and posting some content. The current weather is, gosh, a bit cloudy, but we're very hopeful it will clear later. So we're going to keep our fingers on the telescope dome buttons, and if it does clear later on tonight, we'll be opening up the telescope for some live online viewing. Fingers and toes crossed for that. Sana, how's the sky where you are?
It's very annoying that it's really clear here, but it's not clear at York. Um,
Well, at least we have an all-sky camera, so
yeah,
we can look at the direction of the clouds and hope for the best. Of course, everyone will have been watching the clouds very intently last week when we were not on the air because, of course, the eclipse was happening. Oh my gosh!
that was
Just in
amazing.
Yeah, then just in case anyone is wondering why we weren't broadcasting last week, it was because the observatory crew went to all the corners of Ontario looking for clear views on April 8th to catch the total solar eclipse that was passing just outside of York University. So not going over the observatory, unfortunately, but southwest and northeast. Which direction did you go, Sana?
I went in the direction of Kingston. I'm not sure what direction that is actually. Um,
The direction of Kingston.
so I think east,
Northish?
yeah, kind of
Northeast?
northeast, maybe. Yeah,
Well, directions are harder when they're on land. With the sky, you can just use RAN declination, but
yeah,
this pesky longitude and latitude gives you a bit more trouble. Yeah,
yeah.
most people went north and east or south and west of Toronto. So most people around the Toronto area. Of course, if you were very far out in Ontario, you would have been stuck with a partial eclipse unless you had a very long drive. I went southwest, and on the day, of course, April 8th, we did have some clouds, and they were moving out of the way, but not in time to reach most of the, shall I say, the eastern shore near the lakes type of area. So a lot of us were rushing west at the last minute, and that was in that boat.
Yeah, we got very lucky in Kingston with the clouds where it was kind of partly cloudy for the first part. It cleared just enough to be able to see the corona and everything for totality, and then like 5 minutes later it got so cloudy you couldn't see anything through the glasses anymore. So
Amazing.
it was really perfect timing.
Well, and you guys had you had a little over 3 minutes in Kingston, I believe.
Yes, we did. That was the fastest 3 minutes of my life, I
I
think.
agree. Yes, I heartily agree. I swear it was like 5 seconds. I went down towards past Hamilton to a small town called Grimsby, looked at the weather and just drove as west as I could. Stopped at a Simcoe Timmy's parking lot just in time to catch the first bit of the partial eclipse. And it's it was um, once we entered totality almost an hour later, that 3 minutes went so fast I could hardly believe it.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
it
yes,
was fast.
very much worth the drive.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I left home at like 3 in the morning ish and then got home at midnight to try and get that. So it was a very long day, but totally worth it.
Yeah, it's I think that's a common theme for eclipse chasers all over, and I hope everybody listening did get a chance to see some amount of eclipse. If you're in North America, most places got at least a partial. The one place that didn't really get anything was, of course, the northwestern part of North America. So Alaska completely missed out on this one, and I believe part of Victoria as well got not even none of a partial, but everywhere else, almost everywhere else across North America got something. Um, so it was quite the event back last week on April 8th. I thought we'd maybe start off with a little bit of eclipse excitement. Of course, we're probably going to be talking about it for the next year. For most of us, this was the first total solar eclipse we've had a chance to experience. It was definitely the first one I ever saw.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Well, now at least we can say we've seen one.
Yeah. And
And of
I
course,
think,
oh yeah.
oh yeah, I was gonna say the thing that I think surprised me the most is that you could actually see the prominences with the naked eye. I had not been expecting that.
Yeah, and did you see the flare?
Yes, yeah, the really big one. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great one, like, because that was so bright. For a minute, I thought the eclipse was over. And it was great to see. I mean, and all these features on the corona that you would normally never be able to see with your eyeballs popping out. Great event. And of course, if anyone is wondering where all the pictures are, you can see that same website I put in the introduction, yorku.ca/science/observatory. The April 8th eclipse page will have a photo gallery coming soon. And hopefully everyone's going to load in their pictures.
I still need to upload my pictures. I've not done that yet, but I got
Excellent.
good ones. But
Yes, upload all your favorite pictures. They'll go on the Eclipse Gallery website, and of course, our bloggers who are updating, have already posted some amazing pictures. That's Robin Metcalf and Bruce Waters. Beautiful pictures of the eclipse and the moon in front of the sun. So some of them are already up there, and lots more to come from partial to total for the, of course, very exciting event. I think we're still in a little bit of eclipse hangover mode, but um, that's what happens when you get too much excitement for astronomers. Everyone just can't stop talking about it.
oh yeah, yeah. So the first This Week in History item is going to be just a more recent history. So April 19th, 2021, which was when the Ingenuity Mars helicopter took its first flight. So Ingenuity was part of NASA's Mars 2020 mission, which launched Ingenuity and the Perseverance rover to Mars. The pair launched, I don't remember what time in 2020, but ended up landing in Jezero Crater in February 2021. At that point, the Ingenuity rover was sort of attached to the belly of the Perseverance rover so that they could launch together instead of separately. And then Ingenuity was later deployed from the belly of Perseverance on April 3rd, 2021, ahead of its first flight a couple weeks later. So the main sort of mission goal for the Ingenuity helicopter was a little bit different to the Perseverance rover. Perseverance had kind of its own set of science goals that it needed to accomplish and has been doing a great job at accomplishing these science goals. But the Ingenuity helicopter, on the other hand, was more of a technology demonstration than anything else. So it was really just meant to demonstrate that you could have powered, controlled flight on another planet. This is kind of necessary to demonstrate because there's a lot of really cool science that can be done by flying helicopters on other planets. So it's things like the helicopters can do their own sorts of science experiments. They can also assist with the rovers or other things that are or the robotic explorations that are happening on the surface of Mars. But unfortunately, flying on the planet Mars in particular is pretty hard because its atmosphere is very thin. It has only about 1% of the atmospheric pressure that we have here on the Earth, which means that it has a very hard time actually obtaining lift on the surface of Mars to be able to actually fly properly. So NASA wanted to basically just send an essentially a basic version of a Mars helicopter to demonstrate that it really was possible to fly on the planet Mars. And that's exactly what Ingenuity did. It was basically a pretty just bare bones helicopter. It had these two 1.2-meter long rotor blades that it used to fly. It was only about 49 centimeters tall, weighed 4 pounds in total, and it didn't have really any science experiments or anything on board. It just had the sort of altimeters and stuff that it needed to be able to fly properly. And it also had a couple cameras on board so that it could take pictures while it was in flight. But apart from that, it didn't have any other sort of science experiments or anything. So the first flight of Ingenuity happened on April 19th, 2021. It had a very short test flight that was 39.1 seconds in total. All it did was fly up to an altitude of about 10 feet, hovered there for 30 seconds before touching down on the surface of Mars again. And while this is definitely a short flight, it was a really, really important and historic flight for Mars exploration and kind of, I think, aviation in general, because it was the first time that there was controlled flight on a planet that was not Earth. So really, really awesome, great up thing to remember and went down in the history books. So in recognition of this event, NASA ended up naming the field in Jezero Crater that Ingenuity flew in the Wright Brothers Field. And the field is now also officially recognized by the International Civil Aviation Association, who gave Jezero Crater its own airport code and also gave Ingenuity its own official call sign. So I think that's kind of just a cute way to sort of commemorate the event. Ingenuity was originally supposed to only fly 5 times, so it would have 5 test flights over the course of about 30 days. Each one of these flights was designed to just continue to increase in complexity and kind of demonstrate the capabilities of Ingenuity, gather data for future potential Mars helicopters. But by the end of the 5 flights, they all went very well. The helicopter was still in very good health. So NASA decided to just continue flying the thing until it couldn't anymore. In total, Ingenuity ended up flying a total of 72 flights and lasted over 3 years' time. So much, much longer than the original mission plan for 30 days. During these 3 years, it primarily worked as a scout for the Perseverance rover, assisting in sort of planning out different routes for Perseverance, which was great for scientifically for Perseverance, but also provided some really valuable data about how Mars helicopters can be used to assist any rovers on the surface of Mars. Now, unfortunately, a couple of months ago on January 18th, it damaged one of the rotor blades while it was landing. So Ingenuity is no longer flying, unfortunately, but it's still a really fantastic mission that lasted like 3 years when the initial mission plan was only to last for 30 days.
So much fun. One of my very, very favorite missions.
Yeah, yeah. Ingenuity was a really fun mission to follow. I remember actually watching the NASA did a live stream of when they were receiving the data from Ingenuity for the first flight. So I remember watching that. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's this idea of Martian flight has been around for so long. There have been old sci-fi novels that included it. What kind of craft would you need to fly on Mars? Things with incredible wingspans. It could be super light. And what they actually ended up sending for the first time, for the first real flight, is something that is, by all accounts, really complicated. It's a helicopter.
Yeah.
I mean, helicopters are so much harder to fly than planes, and it still worked. I mean, phenomenally, much
Mhm.
more than it they had hoped for. So again, we've seen yet again from a mission that was initially successful. It just went way beyond what they thought it would do.
Yeah, yeah. I guess just another instance of NASA. What is it? They under promise and then over deliver.
Yeah, well, that's you try to make the craft as durable as possible with the hopes that it might do the thing that you want, and yeah, it just keeps on going, and it does have a full list of all the flights recorded. If anyone's interested, on the NASA Ingenuity site, so you can actually look up some of the videos that it took of this helicopter flying around, and a lot of the videos show the shadow of the helicopter flying across the Martian surface. It's just so, so, so cool.
Oh yeah. Yeah. A fun thing I also found out is that they actually kept at NASA a handwritten flight log for Ingenuity, which is typical for pilots to do. So they actually had the chief pilot of Ingenuity keep handwritten logbooks for this. So it's also a pretty fun little thing.
Wow, where was that job when I was when I was looking? That would be so fun. In charge of the handwritten logbook.
Yeah,
Oh
for
my
a
God,
Mars helicopter. Like
for
that's
Mars. That whoever had that job, I'm just immediately jealous of.
yeah.
Um, and I mean, it wasn't completely flawless. They did have a few little anomalies. They had a dust storm. What was it, the 2021 dust storm, I think, came through. But still 72 flights successful. And the only reason it had to stop was because it got damaged. And, I think that what I read before was that they think that the damage happened upon landing. Um,
Yeah,
but
it was something like they used Perseverance as kind of a relay between the helicopter and the Earth, and apparently it kind of disconnected a couple seconds too early. So the helicopter did something weird and just hit one of the rotor blades on the ground.
Yeah, and you can see that from the last pictures, it's sort of like, yep, that looks like a sad helicopter.
Yeah.
But hugely successful in its primary mission, and in terms of being able to navigate on another planet, this is exactly what you need, right? Something to see the landscape from above, while you're going around. So reconnaissance and like the amount that you can see is so much greater. I can't wait until it's in the next one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Super helicopter,
Mhm.
whatever it's going to be called. Although we're still missing, of course, that some Jupiter moons exploration missions too. So I'm not sure
Yeah.
which one will go first, but
All of the money just needs to be put into funding NASA. And
and space agencies across the world. There's some
yes.
wonderful things happening in JAXA, and but yes, more of these, please.
Yeah.
Um, Hugely successful, and lots and lots of wonderful resources for both enthusiasts and experts. Whether you're interested in just seeing you know um, the ingenuity flying around, or actually examining the geology of Mars on the surface.
Mhm.
um, but yes, I'm a big Mars enthusiast from way back when, so I know We could probably stay on this one for a while, but maybe I should go to our next our
Yeah.
next topic.
Mhm.
So I am, the clouds appear to perhaps be clearing, but I am getting a couple power outages here. So
Oh,
I hope that I am able to stay on okay. But my next This Week in Space Astronomy History, I decided to pick the same day as you, Sana, April 19th. But I decided for a little bit of a different kind of flight. I've gone all the way back to 1971, and this was the first space station ever launched by humans. So this was Salyut 1, the world's first space station. So 1971. Not that long ago, or really long ago, I suppose, depending on how old you are and how you look at it. The world's very first space station went up, and this was designed for a 6 month on orbit operational lifetime. So it was hoped that it would be up there for 6 months, and it was launched into low Earth orbit by the Soviet Union, which existed then. Officially the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, um, which lasted until 1991. So 1971, the Salyut 1 was launched and became the first ever. So it was a modified, it was a modified airframe from a project that had already existed called Almaz, and it was a fairly simple little space observatory. And it didn't have a lot of these crazy modern conveniences that we've read about on the International Space Station that we have now. I mean, we've seen plants being grown on the International Space Station. We've seen the coffee machine that they have now. None of that back in 1971. So Salyut 1 was a very, very simple module. It was not very large. It had a restricted compartment. So the main compartment was about 13 feet or 4 meters in diameter. So this was about enough for 8 chairs or seven work consoles. You had control panels and some portals, portholes. So these little windows, but a lot of them were obstructed by instruments. So the inside would have been very, very crammed. They used a lot of colors to help people orient where things were. And yeah, they just had this simple main compartment. There was a third pressurized compartment that just contained the control and equipment's communication. They had a life support system and basic auxiliary. And then there was a final small fourth compartment, which was only 2 meters in diameter. So that's very very slim. um, and these little modules were all sort of stuck together. It had solar cell panels, which we've seen on so many space station designs since then. But those are strips of solar cells that extend out from the module. And if you can imagine kind of a bunch of cylinders stuck together, that was the basic design. And that's, still pretty much what we have, just more complicated cylinders, and solar panels on these strips going out from the sides, sort of a line of solar panels, which brings in a little bit of power into the system. So it already had solar cell technology, or these early solar voltaic cells. Um, Awesome. Of course, you had to have heat regulation and radiators and control devices because this was for space, and humans require a lot of support. So this simple little Salyut 1, was the very very first one. It became one of the cores of the Russian segment of the International Space Station, actually. And so this world's first space station launched into low Earth orbit, and again, 1971. Um, it's it was one of the first modules, and it was followed up with 5 more successful launches. So if you can imagine, like, additional cylinders keep getting stuck to this thing. Um, eventually you had the final module, which was the Zvezda DOS 8, and that became the core of the Russian segment of the current International Space Station and remains in orbit. So Salyut 1 was by itself just one little module. It was visited by Soyuz 10, which was the world's first mission to the world's first space station, and Soyuz 11. So Soyuz 10 did not have a successful docking, so they came up and they weren't actually able to dock with their spacecraft, and they had to return to Earth without actually going into the station. So they got all the way up there, and then they had to come back down. Soyuz 11 was the only Soyuz 11 was the only crewed mission to board the world's first space station. So the only crewed mission to actually get on board, and they did not. This made them. They did not have a good mission at all. This was a very big sort of early space disaster because they got on board the Salyut 1, and when they departed, the mission actually ended in disaster. So the crew capsule depressurized during reentry, and all three of the astronauts unfortunately did pass away. The three crew members of Soyuz 11 are the only humans to have died in space. So this was Georgy Dobrovsky and Vladislav Volkov and Viktor Patsayev. So this mission was a lot of firsts, some of them good, some of them not so good. The Soyuz 11, of course, disaster did not bode particularly well. So after this, of course, the depressurization, they were all deceased. And the interesting thing was the capsule did actually make it all the way back to Earth. And there wasn't a lot of damage outside, but they were depressurized. So basically, they lost all the air out of their capsule into space. So very I don't know, suppose dynamic, and also a little bit of early space tragedy. These early missions, a lot of firsts, but a lot of extreme danger, and it really highlights, I think, the hard part about space travel. These incredible extreme environments require such good support systems, and even one tiny little leak anywheres is enough to depressurize your system. And the environment is so hostile in low Earth orbit that humans would do not survive. So the Salyut 1 sort of originated as part of this early space race, and they were trying to actually sort of do a one-up of the U.S. Skylab program. So Skylab was occupied for about 24 weeks in 1973, between 1973 and 1974, and this was trying to kind of beat them. So this was 1971. Of course, they only had one set of astronauts actually get on board, and after that, the second set did not. Well, they got on, but they couldn't make it back to Earth, unfortunately. So it is a interesting time in this week in space and astronomy history. And Salyut 1 aborted the mission after Soyuz 11, so after the disaster. And of course, reentry of Salyut 1 was a concern ever since it went up, because of course this is a fairly substantial module, and you don't want it just crashing back to Earth and, I don't know, landing in someone's house in Australia like that one did. So don't crash your spaceships into Australia. So it was moved into a higher orbit in July to August of 1971, so that it wouldn't be destroyed prematurely through orbital decay. And then in the meantime, they actually did redesign the Soyuz capsules to allow pressure suits to be worn during launch. So if you did have a pressurization disaster, it wouldn't necessarily kill your astronauts. Um, and unfortunately, the redesign to protect the astronauts took so long that Salyut 1 was actually running out of fuel. And they decided that they would go ahead and a deorbit maneuver so that it would burn up over the ocean and not crash into Australia, for example. So it's a little bit of a exciting times, but also it really highlights the truly extreme nature, I think, of space travel, and not to be trifled with.
Hmm. Yeah. But parts of this space station you said were still actually in space being used as part of the ISS now?
Yeah. So what's happened was the Salyut one was part of a series.
Oh.
And the final module of the program, of the Salyut program, so the final module that was kind of sent as part of this Salyut series, I believe was Salyut DOS 8. It's also called Zvezda Service Module. And this one was launched substantially later. So this one was part of that same Salyut program, but it wasn't launched until I think 2000. But that's the one that actually is a module of the International Space Station, and it provides all the station's life support systems. So I suppose a little bit of a happy ending, despite the disaster and all this stuff. What they've learned and the technology and the support systems are currently actually providing life support for our station right now, the ISS.
Hmm. Yep, that's really cool that there's still components of that that are still being used. And
Hey, yeah, and I mean, if it's a really, and this goes back to your story as well. If it's a really good system, really well designed, it can stay in use for a long time and still be good.
hmm. Hmm.
So speaking of space, I suppose, if we travel around a little bit more and maybe go out of the Soviet Union back to NASA, I think that might get us to your next item.
Yeah, so this is another April 19th, just by chance, and also has to do with the International Space Station. So April 19th, 2001, anniversary of the launch of STS-100, which was actually a pretty significant mission for the Canadian Space Agency. Uh, so there was a crew of, I think it was 7 astronauts who launched on the Space Shuttle Endeavour from Kennedy Space Center Launch Complex 39A. There were two NASA astronauts, Commander Kent Rominger and pilot Jeffrey Ashby. And then there were 5 mission specialists, which included Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield, NASA astronauts John Phillips and Scott Przinsky, ESA astronaut Umberto Giordani, and the Russian astronaut Yuri Lonkachov. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Apologies in advance if I am not pronouncing that correctly. So there was definitely a mission that had a lot of different partner nations that had all been working towards the International Space Station. So it's pretty cool in that respect. But this mission was particularly important for Canada for 2 reasons. So first off, this was the mission that actually launched and installed the Canadarm2 on the International Space Station. The Canadarm2 is basically this really massive 17.6-meter long robotic arm that is used for a whole bunch of stuff on the International Space Station. It's a kind of more updated version of the Canadarm that was used on a lot of the space shuttle missions, which could basically just help astronauts do a whole bunch of stuff on the outside of the ISS. So the Canadarm2 has now been on the International Space Station for over 20 years. And during its time there, it helped assemble the International Space Station after it was launched. Keep in mind, this was 2001, so it was still kind of early days of the space station. And Canadarm2 did a lot of work in order to help assemble the ISS. It also helps with general maintenance on the International Space Station. It can move equipment around outside the station, assist astronauts during spacewalks, including actually picking up astronauts and moving them around the outside of the International Space Station, and can even do things like help dock spacecraft to the ISS, which includes things like the Space Shuttle, And even now, not Crew Dragon, but the uncrewed Dragon capsules can also be docked to the International Space Station using Canadarm. So another important part of this mission for Canada was that it was the first time that a Canadian astronaut had done a spacewalk. So that goes to Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield, one of the mission specialists on STS-100. He and NASA astronaut Scott Krasinski did two spacewalks on STS-100, with the main goal for both of those spacewalks to be to install Canadarm2 on the Destiny module of the International Space Station. They did do a couple other things during these spacewalks, but kind of the main mission goal for STS-100 was just to get Canadarm2 up and running so that it could start to assist with various things on the International Space Station. Another cool little thing that happened during some of this mission was that there was a robotic handshake that happened between Canadarm2 and the Canadarm that was on the Space Shuttle Endeavour. So they astronauts needed to use the Canadarm that was on Space Shuttle Endeavour in order to help them actually install Canadarm2. So they used a robotic arm to help install a robotic arm. And once Canadarm2 was up and running, astronauts from inside the International Space Station were actually able to take Canadarm2, have it pick up its little launch pallet that it had been sitting in the cargo bay of Endeavour, and hand that off to the Canadarm, which would then put the launch pallet into the cargo bay of Endeavour to return to Earth. So it was kind of nicknamed a robotic handshake, or the Canadian handshake, between two of Canada's robotic arms on the outside of the International Space Station. So yeah, Canadarm has been hugely successful. Canadarm2 has been hugely successful, really, at helping to maintain the International Space Station. And it's also kind of solidified Canada's role in the space program. Canada has now agreed to contribute a Canadarm3 to the Artemis missions. So generally now, whenever you want robotic arms or robotic, I guess, hands in space, you definitely look to Canada, because Canada has done that many times now. The mission ended after 11 days in space in total, nearly 12 days. And everybody returned to Earth successfully back at, I think it was Kennedy Space Center. So happy anniversary to the launch of STS-100.
Absolutely. And of course, Canada-ARM potentially being on that lunar gateway and part of the upcoming Artemis program is just super, super exciting. I really hope the lunar gateway does get underway. I
Mhm.
haven't seen the most updated schedules yet, but um, the right now they're saying that Canadarm3 is expected to play a major role in the Artemis program after 2024. And by my watch,
Uh,
it is 2024 now. So, originally they were saying they're going to, look at launching in 2025. I think that might be a little bit premature. But
yeah,
fingers and toes crossed for Canada Arm 3 and many more Canada Arms to come.
yeah. And fun fact, the Canadarms are manufactured by the company MDA Space, which is actually headquartered in Brampton. So pretty close
Hey,
by. Yeah,
yes, shout out to Brampton.
yeah.
And of course, I have to say as well, since you mentioned, of course, the astronauts involved and Hadfield, it's worth also maybe giving a shout out to the previous Canadian astronaut sort of contingent, which was just before Hadfield. We had, of course, Stephen McLean, who was a York University graduate had a doctorate in physics in 1983 from
Ah,
our very own York University. So, connection to the Allan Carswell Observatory, hooray!
oh, that's awesome.
And for any students listening from York, our connection's even better because McLean, he also was an honorary fellow of the Norman Bethune College, which is just across the walk from us.
Hmm.
So lots of good connections to be made with Canada Arm, of course.
Yeah.
And I am very much looking forward to, of course, this Canada Arm 3, I have to say, and the lunar South Pole exploration.
Mhm.
I just you cannot get enough of it at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. Lunar exploration is just, it's so cool. So I will follow anything related to lunar exploration very closely.
Yeah, I want to see these water samples being brought back for analysis because this
Mhm.
is just too awesome. Um,
Mhm.
all right, so let's see. We've got, I think, short little break, and then we'll do one more quick one. I would just like to say to anyone listening, if you are listening to this broadcast and somehow not on YouTube, make sure to head on over because they have actually opened up the telescope and they are right now live on the sky tonight. So looks like the clouds have cleared.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Finally.
Finally, I know, right?
The weather forecast was right for once in its life.
Well, it's always got a chance. I'd say 50-50.
Yeah.
There's a 50-50 chance of the weather doing what we think it'll do in the next hour.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's welcome to Toronto.
Yep.
But this is why we have a weather system. All right,
Hmm.
so one more this week in space astronomy and history. I'll probably do this one quick because a lot of you will have heard of this one before. Very, very recently, on April 12th, we just had a holiday. It's an astronomy holiday, so forgive everyone if it's not in all your calendars. But this was Yuri's night. So April 12th is Yuri's night, and it sort of is a bit of a celebration. April 12th, 1961, so going back in time again, April 12th, 1961, this was when Yuri Gagarin from the Soviet Union, the first human in space, had completed one orbit around the Earth. His vehicle Vostok 1 circled the Earth at a speed of 27,400 kilometers per hour. The flight lasted 108 minutes. And yeah, he made it. So this was a very exciting times, as I say. We're talking about being adventurous. We've talked about how dangerous this space exploration was and is. But Yuri Gagarin, on April 12th, 1961, aboard Vostok 1, became the first human to travel into space, and he was 27 years old, a test pilot, and yeah, he orbited the Earth at a maximum altitude of 187 miles. It was entirely automatic control, so he didn't have steering wheels or anything like that. And the only statement that came of this whole flight was a quote that, and this is a quote: "Flight is proceeding normally. I am well." Which is like, yeah, I that's all it was quoted. But he made it back onto Earth successfully, and he was awarded lots of sort of titles and accolades. um, the Soviet Union putting the first human into space was a tremendous blow to the U.S. and the space race of the time. The U.S. had been planning for a May 1961, and of course this was April 12th that he actually orbited the Earth. And the U.S. space program would not catch up until February of 1962. So this is almost a year later. And that was when the US had astronaut John Glenn made 3 orbits around the Earth. And of course, by 1962, the Soviet Union had already gone ahead and done another flight with another astronaut or cosmonaut, I should say, German Titov, and he made 17 orbits and spent 25 hours in space. So this was a tremendous sort of time, I suppose, and the first space flight of 12th of April, um, it has it has since then migrated into a bit of a international celebration, and Yuri's Night is basically held every year whenever scientists get very enthusiastic about space, I suppose. Um, and since about 2000, Yuri's Night has been a general sort of celebration of milestones in space exploration. In 2011, they actually declared Yuri's Night the day of the International Day of Human Spaceflight. Um, so it's gone around a little bit, and a bit of fun is the Yuri's Night creation was actually done, as I say, internationally, and lots of different people came into sort of I suppose, into the celebration, combining space themes with education and outreach. You'll often find parties being held by places that haven't just celebrated total eclipses, I suppose. So we didn't do too much at the observatory this year, but a lot of times we do have Yuri's Night celebrations, and of course, it's a wonderful night to watch some of these old launches and launch footages if you have access to them. Um, so Yuri's Night was actually, just to be clear, it was not actually created until the year 2000. So this is somewhat of a new holiday, but it's on a day where lots of other holidays around this happen. So called many things by many people, and now, of course, it's also an International Day of Human Spaceflight. April 12th is a wonderful time to kind of remember um, all of these space missions and the incredible developments that have happened since then. And yeah, think about where we're going next, like perhaps that lunar gateway we mentioned before.
Yeah, maybe Mars next or after
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I think Mars would be a good choice, but I am a little biased. I could be convinced to Europa if we had submarines.
Oh yeah, Europa would be awesome. But yeah, could you imagine just being by yourself in low Earth orbit though? That would be a little much.
It would be quite the thing. I think what one quote I've heard, and I can't quite remember exactly where, was that it's not that scary because there's no gravity, because you're weightless.
Mm.
So, I mean, I don't know if that would be necessarily be true. I think that if you're able to focus and if you were, for example, like doing repairs and things like that, you would be following your checklist for the repairs. But if you just got to hang out there and look at it, yeah, that would be quite the thing.
Yeah, yeah. The funny thing I always remember is I think it was Michael Collins, the
Yes.
yeah, he
Yeah.
in for Apollo 11, he was by himself in the command module for a while his other astronauts were on the surface of the moon. I always remember the quote where he said that he liked it when he went on past lunar far side because he couldn't communicate with the ground crews and that they would stop yapping at him for a little bit. Um, that's definitely could not do that and don't think I could relate to that, but I always think it's kind of funny. He wanted to be left alone.
He has some really, really good quotes, actually. Um, but yeah, of course, very famous for being the person who was kind of left behind. He does have some amazing, amazing quotes that I would absolutely recommend any Apollo enthusiast to go and look up. I don't think I have them all handy at the moment, um, but yeah, he's a very interesting character.
Mhm.
And of course, he has unfortunately passed away as of 2021. Um, but the whole Apollo program is one that's I think on a lot of folks' mind, especially now that we do have this Lunar Gateway proposal.
Mhm.
All right, so let's go ahead and quickly, because time is flying all of a sudden. I shouldn't. I was like, boy, that was too much fun. Quickly, we'll just do a couple reminders, and I'm just going to completely skip the midway check because we're way past it. But just quick reminder. We'll skip on Pons Brooks because I have a little mini story on that. Sana, do you want to just quickly do the observing reminder?
Yes, so if anybody's looking to do any observing in the morning, Mars and Saturn are starting to rise in the early morning just before sunrise. And if you're looking to observe in the evening, definitely catch Jupiter, which is setting kind of with the sun around now. And if you're like me and love the winter constellations like the Orion constellation, just a reminder that you are now approaching the last chance to actually observe these things. They're starting to set very early now, so they will be gone for the next few months if you don't catch them now.
Yeah, and I'll just do a quick little reminder as well for anyone listening. The very first atrium tour of the summer season is happening this week, this Wednesday. Free tickets are on that same website I told you many times earlier on today. Of course, that would be the Observatory. yorku.ca/science/observatory. And a little extra note, if you're interested in things that aren't going to be visible for much longer, that fascinating comet, Pons Brooks, that was flying past Jupiter during totality, during the actual eclipse that happened on April 8th, I couldn't hardly believe it. That periodic comet that only comes around every 71 years in Ontario, in the northern hemisphere, you need to get it just as the sun is setting, and it's very low in on the horizon in the west, just quite close to the sun. It's getting close to the sun, so it's brighter, but that also means that you've got to catch it really low on the horizon. It's also moving just out of our field of view in the northern hemisphere. So especially if you're in Ontario, make sure to check it out soon, very close to sunset. You'll want to use binoculars. We think it'll be about magnitude 5. So if you want to catch that comet, make sure to get it as soon as you can, because in a few more weeks, it's going to be too low for anyone to catch in Ontario. All right, so let's go ahead and do your story, Sana, as our science news last blast for the show.
Okay, so this is a new discovery about something that I think we've talked about on York Universe before. So just a quick sort of background on this. On October 9th, 2022, there was a very bright gamma ray burst that was observed. It's been nicknamed the boat for the brightest of all time because it was brighter than by several times than any other gamma ray burst that has ever been observed. Several telescopes started observing the gamma ray burst itself and the afterglow of the gamma ray burst, where it was radiating light at some longer wavelengths, which included JWST. So it turns out a quick summary of the previous observations and previous science results is that the thing that launched the gamma ray burst was likely a supernova explosion that created a black hole. And that it seems like the reason the gamma ray burst was so bright is because the star was spinning rapidly before it went supernova. So it created these really sort of narrow and focused beams of radiation that for the gamma ray burst that made the gamma ray burst itself incredibly bright, but not so much the supernova itself, which is more just a normal kind of brightness. So among some of the newer science results out of JWST on this really cool supernova explosion is that it didn't find any evidence for heavy elements like gold or platinum in the afterglow or in the supernova. And this is very odd because everybody has kind of suspected for a very long time that the heavy elements in the universe, anything heavier than basically iron, is created during supernova explosions like the ones that launched the boat. But these new observations are kind of pointing to maybe that's not the way that it works. JWST has observed the creation of heavy elements like gold and platinum in neutron star mergers, but there just aren't really enough neutron star mergers happening in the universe to account for the amounts of these heavy elements that we actually observe. So there has to be some other sort of primary mechanism to be producing these heavy elements that isn't neutron star mergers. But these new observations of this supernova explosion suggests that it might not be all supernova. So this supernova definitely didn't produce any of these heavy elements. So it might be that certain kinds of supernova actually don't produce heavy elements like everybody thought they could. This is not necessarily to say that no supernova explosions create heavy elements, but it is interesting that this one specifically didn't. So there might be some kinds of supernova explosions that just don't produce heavy elements, which is pretty cool. But yeah, that's the gist of this news item.
Yeah, and of course, trying to recreate elements out of the periodic table uh, is a hard thing, actually.
Yeah.
And some of the processes we do understand for lighter elements, as you say, carbon, and all the way up to iron, really. We could see how fusion processes help those to happen. But what exactly has to happen for those heavier elements? Um, that's a tough tangle. So
Mhm.
I think it's interesting, as you say, this was, there's an opportunity for a lot of boat puns here, um, but it was a really interesting, uniquely intense event that would not be typical of most supernova by all accounts. So it's kind of an interesting one to me. I can't help thinking maybe perhaps its unique properties have somehow come into play and prevented it from creating these elements that we would otherwise expect. But it's like all good mysteries, it's just a wonderful opportunity to go get more observations.
Oh yeah.
So we get more JWST time, please.
Yes. Yeah, they did also say in the article that this was really a once in 10,000 year event just because of how bright this gamma ray burst was. So yeah, definitely is on the kind of unique side of supernova explosions.
Yes, and that is something to remember as well, is that there are so many variables when you come to star interactions and how things come together. You have some stars that are, as you say, rotating extremely fast, like perhaps this one was. There are also other stars that are moving extremely fast. These stars with extremely high velocities due to being ejected or all kinds of interesting things, or extremely interesting companions or extremely interesting environments.
Mhm.
So it's a wonderful thing to think about. And I think this one is just yet another opportunity to appreciate the wonderful James Webb Space Telescope, because I don't know that we would have found it without it.
Yep. Yep. JWST is definitely really unique for a lot of reasons. And I won't say anything else because I could talk about that for a very long time.
We'll have to get you on again, Sana. Please come back and join me again for another episode at some other time, because it's actually time to close off this one. All right, so thank you, everyone. You have been listening to York Universe, the astronomy and astrophysics program written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. The hosts this evening have been Sana Withers and myself, Dr. Elena Hyde. And as a reminder for our program, you can always connect with us on Twitter at York Universe, Instagram, York U Observatory, Facebook at LNI Carswell Obs, and check out our website for show notes, content updates, and of course the donate button at yorku.ca/science/observatory. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Clear skies and have a good night.
Have a good night.